In one village lived a beautiful lady and a terrible witch. The second was ugly, with dull hair and protruding bones. But the worst thing was that her body exuded the most terrible darkness, for which she was nicknamed the Cursed Witch. The villainess kidnapped and ate small children, and her curses were so strong that they spread death everywhere, and because of her, the village was engulfed in plague. The beautiful lady could no longer remain on the sidelines. Having united people, she drove the witch into the dark forest, after which peace finally came, and no one heard anything more about the witch living in the forest. This was the story of Cheryl, a plump 40-year-old fruit and vegetable seller, shaking her finger at 3 boys about 8 years old. The woman strictly told them not to go into that forest, and if they saw a witch, to run immediately. Otherwise, she would catch them and eat them. The Fidgets agreed to do so, but their mood did not deteriorate. Laughing, the boys ran to play. One of them was still a little confused by the story, and he asked his comrades in surprise why the witch was cursed and not cursing. One of the friends laughed and said that it was because the witch stinks. How a plump woman raised children was heard by 2 strange strangers. It seemed like travelers, their faces hidden by combed long hair and the hoods of cloaks. The red-haired man had a pearl-colored cloak with a bow. The brunette had a black cloak with a scarlet lining, pinned with a gold brooch in the form of leaves. It seemed that it was some kind of coat of arms. The red-haired traveler was quietly indignant that it turns out that there are still outbacks where ignorant hillbillies call magicians witches. The brunette didn't say a word, turned around, and left. The redhead, stuttering, begged him to wait and said that he couldn't just leave. The village belonged to the domain of Baron Grandis. His luxurious mansion was surrounded by a wonderful garden. Behind there was a fast river full of fish, and majestic mountains rose on its other bank. They were drinking tea in the mansion. The blonde, mustachioed baron and his no less blonde-haired son had just sent away the obsequious maid. The daughter, that same beautiful lady, was sitting by the window and admiring the beautiful view. Or maybe she was looking out for something. She was wearing a soft pink dress, which favorably set off her porcelain skin with a delicate blush. A bow in her blonde hair matched the dress. A white porcelain vase with pink flowers standing next to her on the windowsill completed the image, worthy of the brush of the best artists. The young lady's crimson lips were pursed, and from the expression of her huge blue eyes, it was clear that she was thinking about something and wondering about something. Turning sharply and efficiently to her father, Baroness Alicia asked for confirmation of his words, over which she had just been pondering whether this was definitely not a dream, and whether the crown prince was really looking for a bride. Baron Grandis said with a smile that, apparently, the rumors do not lie, since his path even extends through the village lands. Alicia proudly declared that she was confident in herself, and that how could anyone, even if it was the crown prince, not fall in love with her at first sight, and that her father only needed to help her a little. The young baroness would take care of the rest herself. Baron Grandis confirmed that he would do anything for his daughter, but internally he doubted. The baron could not believe that the heir to the imperial throne, who did not even glance at girls who were not noble enough, was looking for a bride in small villages. His son agreed with him. Suddenly they were both dumbfounded with surprise when they heard the baroness, a beautiful young rose, cursing someone with anger and disgust. The young lady's gentle face twisted when she saw through the window that a girl very similar to her, dressed in rags, dirty and disheveled, was standing near the gate and demanding something from the gatekeeper. Alicia was indignant at how this dirty nonentity dared to come to them. The father asked the young lady to calm down, saying that he would come out and sort it out himself, but the daughter wanted to do it herself. The worried mother of Alicia and her brother came to the screams. The same blonde and still very attractive, although no longer so blooming. Together with her father they stood, anxiously waiting for what their daughter would do. Down at the gate, the gatekeeper, coughing and covering his nose, tried to ward off an emaciated, dirty woman in a torn old dress. A pungent, unpleasant smell emanated from the girl. The slut claimed that she was the Baron's second daughter, Letitia. to which the gatekeeper replied that before lying, she should wash her face first, and that she smelled as if she had bathed in a cesspool. The girl was beside herself with anger. Baroness Alicia looked no less angry as she quickly walked up to the gate with a proud step, fanning herself with a fan to drive away the stench. The guard tried to dissuade the lady from coming closer to the dirty woman, but the young lady wanted to talk to the uninvited guest herself and sent him away. The gatekeeper promised to wait nearby. For several minutes they simply stood, glaring at each other, the noble noblewoman and the dirty one in rags, strangely similar in face, although Alicia's features were softer and her height was a little taller. The young lady looked at the guest contemptuously and expectantly. At first she simply glared at her with a hateful gaze, then sadly lowered her head and said that she had come because her house was falling apart. Alicia sharply asked what the point of this story was. Letitia continued that for the 3rd month now, nothing had been sent to her from the estate, so she had nothing to eat. The recognized daughter of the Baron, angrily indignant how long the dirty one would demand to be looked after, and that at her age it was high time she learned to take care of herself. The young lady harshly announced that the dirty woman needed to find a husband and show his whims, or earn a living herself, and angrily asked if she was not ashamed to live like this. Grabbing her head, the Baroness exhaled indignantly, then took out a gold coin and threw it through the gate onto the ground, saying that if the stinky one needed something, then let him go and buy it. The girl in rags said haltingly and sullenly that as Alicia knows she cannot go to the market. Letitia did not pick up the coin. Crossing her arms and furiously glaring at her frightened interlocutor, the Baroness, with a malicious grin, asked why she couldn't go to the market. Was it really because of the stench? Letitia became angry again, and Alicia threateningly told her not to force her to repeat it, and added that just the sight of the petitioner gave her goosebumps. The young lady was indignant that suddenly she would start to stink because of the visitor. She tried to get a word in, but Alicia called her a damned stinking witch and ordered her not to be seen again. Turning around, the young Baroness left. Without listening to Letitia's further requests, she stood sadly in her torn, too short, above the ankle, dress, which was once blue. When the young lady entered the mansion, the petitioner sadly turned around and wandered home. By evening, in the pouring rain, Letitia reached an old wooden hut in the forest, in which she had lived for the last 10 years. It was dark and damp in the miserable hut. Because of the cracks, the wind scattered kindling brushes all over the floor, and rain poured into the hut through a hole in the roof. Letitia was depressed and angry about how much cleaning she had to do, and she was also in a lot of pain. Because of the rain, it was so slippery that the girl, not for the first time, got hurt, and blood flowed thickly down her leg. A weak ray of light from the window barely illuminated an unpainted wooden table with 2 identical chairs opposite each other. Beyond them, almost nothing was visible. Limping, the girl reached the table and sat down tiredly. The poor thing sadly and angrily thought that she had been wandering around all day, but had not found anything useful, and she also needed to sew clothes from leftover fabric and at least put a bucket where the roof was leaking. But in the dark, she could not do anything. With anger, the beggar woman looked at her wretched table, on which stood an empty mug, rusty scissors, and an overturned copper candlestick on a heavy stand, and with a thick needle for attaching a candle. In a rage, Letitia thought that even if she could have used the money, she would not have touched the handout from the arrogant younger sister who had rejected her. From early childhood, Alicia knew how to use her cuteness to manipulate people. Everyone liked her. Letitia, who was only a year older, was also cute in appearance, but a constant stench emanated from her body, which could not be washed away. Therefore, as soon as the younger sister was born, the parents immediately rejected the older one, who was unpleasant to approach. The baby cried, but even the nannies refused to take care of her out of disgust, and subsequently her own sister cared absolutely nothing about her. Letitia was sent to a barn, away from the mansion, where she quietly amused herself with various garbage and old toys that were rarely brought to her. The girl almost didn't cry anymore, realizing that no one would come to console her. Few people knew about the girl's origins. So several years passed, And suddenly, through a crack in the barn, Letitia saw her father and sister stroking a little foal. This was her 8th birthday present. Alicia was glad that the Baron remembered what kind of gift she really wanted for her birthday. The father replied that, of course, he remembers all the wishes of his little daughter. Nobody ever celebrated the birthdays of 9-year-old Letitia, and she also never saw her sister, about whom people from the estate were always whispering. Alicia, in an elegant dress with a bow and beautifully styled curls, also noticed an unkempt mess peeking out through the crack, which she had heard about several times. Giggled maliciously, the Baron's youngest daughter asked her father to leave the barn, explaining that the smell there was so vile that she could no longer stand it. The Baron suggested returning to the estate, and the little lady agreed. Letitia looked through the crack, not looking away. She wanted to be with these people, her family, but she was afraid that they would drive her away, especially since her younger sister had already shown her attitude towards her. With resentment and envy, the rejected daughter looked at her father and sister leaving, a stately blonde man in a velvet vest and silk shirt, and a restless girl dressed up like a doll with an evil look. Little Letitia realized even more strongly her loneliness, her actual poverty, and the disgust that she causes in people without doing anything about it. In total, the disgraced Baroness lived in a dirty barn for 10 years, and another 10 in an old forest hut with almost no furniture. Hitting the table with her scratched and dirty fist, Letitia exclaimed in frustration why she had to live like this. Was it really because she was a witch cursed by the stench? While the relatives of the beggar-born young lady were enjoying a well-fed life in a rich house, she was often hungry and cold. And in her shack, in addition to a table and a chair, there was an old rug just under the table, a bed, and bags, and cast iron pots standing in the corners. Rejected by her family and everyone around her, the girl was offended and indignant that it was not her fault that she was born like this. With tears, she remembered her grandfather, the only one who did not drive her away and communicated with her from time to time, although he did not come very close. The old Baron, expelled by his own son due to drunkenness, now served as a groom on the estate that once belonged to him. He often said that only by overcoming the trials sent by God can one find happiness. Only faith in these words allowed the exiled young lady to survive in the forest for so many years, from childhood, in heat and cold, fearing wild animals and working like a peasant woman, when her sister was only having fun at balls and giving orders in warmth and comfort. In tattered, dirty clothes, often barefoot, Letitia wandered through the forest, in the summer in search of berries, and in the cold months collecting brushwood for kindling. Her arms and legs were torn by branches. There were bruises everywhere from falls. Now, sitting at a squalid table and listening to the rain dripping through the leaky roof, the 21-year-old girl recalled all the years of her lonely, miserable existence in the forest. She thought that she could no longer wait for this happiness that the old Baron spoke about. In sad thoughts, the smeared and scratched beggar woman pursed her lips and fidgeted with the dirty material of her wretched dress. Suddenly, the girl's attention was attracted by a strange sound. Someone was knocking on the door. The Baron's exiled daughter knew that, thanks to her sister's efforts, she was known as the Cursed Witch, so they tried not to approach her God-forsaken hut, and she was surprised who it could be. It is unlikely that anyone on the estate would have brought her food or other necessary things in the evening. Perhaps the robbers found the hut and decided to immediately hide from the rain and rob, and maybe even kill, the owners. On the other hand, it could just be a lost traveler who had nowhere to shelter from the weather and spend the night. But everyone in the neighborhood must have heard about her shack and avoided it. The girl was in a panic. She did not dare to open it, but the knocking intensified. Letitia thought that maybe even God had decided to mock her. Otherwise, why would anyone show up in her house? Hesitantly, the dirty woman walked up to the door and reached for the handle, but pulled her hand away. The disheveled girl stood for some time, looking thoughtfully and fearfully at the door. She was afraid that whoever entered would kill her. But remembering her life and realizing that everything would be the same in the future, the dirty little girl decided that if there is a God, then let him send her someone who will save her from all misfortunes. With a sharp movement, the dirty woman opened the door and froze in surprise when she saw the person knocking. He was a tall man in a black cloak with a scarlet lining, pinned with a brooch similar to a coat of arms. He calmly looked at Letitia from under the hood, showing no disgust at the smell or dissatisfaction with the weather. The girl was frightened by this equanimity, as well as by the whole figure of the stranger, his hood, his handsome but deathly pale face, partially covered by strands of black hair that had not been cut for a long time. But most terrifying of all were the visitor's eyes, sparkling from behind these strands of hair, amber yellow, with a golden tint and with narrow cat-like pupils. In addition to the appearance of the stranger, Letitia was shocked by the fact that, in principle, someone was standing next to her. The hermit did not remember the last time she stood close to another person or clearly saw someone else's face. Even when her father visited Letitia once a year, during the conversation she was not able to see his features with precision because the Baron did not allow his daughter to leave the barn while he stood outside its door. But now, right in front of her, stood a handsome, strangely calm, unfamiliar man with scary eyes and incomprehensible intentions. Smiling softly, the cloaked man politely thanked the owner of the shack for opening the door for him. The pale stranger with cat-like eyes explained that he had gone out hunting, but had gotten lost in the rain, and asked if he could rest in the hut. Letitia was confused. She had once been told that she needed to be careful with unknown people. The girl thought that she had rushed to the entrance in vain. She doubted whether she could believe that the strange visitor was hunting. On the other hand, he did not seem like a robber. Moreover, the stranger promised the surprised beggar a good reward. Taking out a gold coin, the cat-eyed intruder asked if that was enough. The hermit was at first amazed when she saw the money, and then she almost cried because it was impossible for her to come to the market. She was driven away from everywhere. Turning away from the strange stranger and entering the house, Letitia said that money was not needed and that he should just pass through. The pale man in the cloak was surprised when he entered the hut. He began to clarify whether the payment was really not needed, but quickly stopped. In the hands of the dirty man was a heavy candlestick with a huge needle. Holding a makeshift weapon in front of her, the disheveled blonde screamed at the visitor not to come near her, and that she would allow him to stay in the hut for a while if he obeyed. The man looked puzzled and offended, but raised his hands up, and with a smile confirmed that he would just rest a little and leave, because this was Letitia's domain. The hermit did not trust the submissive behavior of the man in the cloak. She suspected that the strange visitor might have some hidden intentions. The owner of the shack wanted to throw out the uninvited visitor right now, but at the same time she felt sorry for him because it was raining heavily outside. Holding out a copper needle threateningly, Letitia demanded that the stranger first sit down, and he obeyed. At the table, with a polite smile, he took off his hood, revealing the collar of a snow-white silk shirt and a little gray vest. The guest tried to be nice, although something predatory flashed in his gaze. Looking away from the hostess with a completely bad look from his golden eyes with creepy pupils, a pale brunette, slightly disheveled from behind his hood, complained about the darkness and suggested turning on the light. Letitia sheepishly explained that the oil for the lamp had run out. The visitor, with a strange, poorly concealed joy, asked if it was really over. The disgraced Baroness confirmed, continuing to aim the tip of her weapon at the man. The stranger looked at the candlestick appraisingly and seemed to have decided that it did not pose much danger, although it was better not to ask for its use. Smiling sweetly, the man in the black cloak said that he often faces a lack of important household items. People rarely stock up on them for future use, although they should. Letitia menacingly asked what he wanted to say by this, and she herself thought that something was clearly wrong, because of the smell, it should be hardly possible for a stranger to even breathe next to her. The man smiled and laughed as if nothing had happened. Nothing seemed to bother him at all, but he again remembered about the payment and took out his wallet. The uninvited guest with creepy eyes began to say that if the hostess did not need money, but stopped short as soon as the frightened Letitia screamed and asked the question of what he was doing. The girl promised that if the man in the raincoat twitched, she would break his head with her improvised weapon, but the visitor took out the contents of the wallet and the owner of the shack was shocked. Instead of money, the wallet contained pieces of dried meat, and the stranger, taking off his cloak and wiping his face with a white silk handkerchief, said that it was enough for him that the girl had saved him, and thanked him. He said that he didn't expect a meal from his hostess, and that he didn't think his beef jerky was enough as a thank you for everything, so if the girl wanted anything else, then let her say it. Letitia was wary. She had not eaten dried meat before, and also did not expect a stranger to bring food, while for the sake of decency, the girl brought a plate, barely finding it in the dark, so that the meat lay on the dishes, and thought that it would be worth preparing a normal dinner. While lighting the fire and chopping the cabbage, Letitia muttered that she didn't need anything else, and she wondered why the visitor spoke as if he would fulfill any request, and thought that he was very strange. Unexpectedly, the stranger asked the hermit a question about who she was. A beggar born to a baroness, stuttering, asked why he needed this. The man explained that he wanted to know who his savior was. Letitia was confused by this wording. The girl did not understand whether she meant a name or something else. The stranger explained that since he would spend some time in the hut, it would be easier if he had the opportunity to call her mistress by name. The hermit, who was just trying to find some leftover salt for soup, reluctantly muttered that her name was Letitia. The uninvited guest, smiling sweetly, said that he was Bertram. Without turning around, the mistress of the house grumbled that she did not ask the name of the visitor, who grinned. The girl in the shabby dress was displeasedly surprised at what the guest was really trying to achieve. His manner of speech seemed strange to her, but familiar. His clothes also seemed unusual. A brunette in a snow-white shirt and a gray vest called out to the mistress of the house, who had gone into her thoughts. The dirty woman was indignant at telling him to sit quietly, but the man with cat eyes, laughing, drew her attention to the fact that the soup had run away. The girl became worried and began to thoroughly stir the future dinner, and the strange guest asked what she was cooking and said that he would like to say that it smells delicious, but cannot smell it. It dawned on Stinky that this is it. That's why the visitor behaves so calmly and doesn't even wrinkle his nose. The hermit asked if the guest really couldn't smell, and if this was not God's test. The baron's internally exiled daughter cried out to her deceased grandfather, asking what she should do. Once upon a time, back in childhood, my grandfather was the only person who did not avoid the stink, although he did not come very close and could wince from the stench. But he communicated with the girl and listened to her complaints. The former owner of the estate, exiled to the stables, maintained conversations with his granddaughter, encouraging and educating her as best he could. Although he had the disadvantage of constant drunkenness, he taught the girl a lot. Even little things like the need to be polite to elders, and that you shouldn't swim in cold water if you don't want to get sick, are not things that the little girl could have thought of on her own. Despite the fact that Letitia lived in a barn and constantly faced contempt because of the stench, the grandfather, although he twisted his face, did not mock his granddaughter or ignore her. He was also one of the few who knew that Letitia was Baroness Grandis by birth. Perhaps that's why he took up her upbringing, because of the call of blood or a sense of justice, or maybe because of his own loneliness. The girl repeatedly complained that she could no longer live the way she lived, to which the old man, deprived of his title, replied that God does not forgive those who end their lives. The grandfather explained to his incredulous granddaughter that if you do this, you will have to pay in the next life. But the girl could not call life the need to put up with incessant cruelty and not die just out of fear for her next existence. The grandfather looked at his granddaughter with surprise and reproach. The girl decided that he would now say again that she was stupid. But instead, the former Baron Grandis asked Letitia whether she really could not smell her body. The girl confirmed. Grandfather suggested that this might be God's plan, to which Letitia was indignant. The grandfather explained that every life has its price, and that he is sure that the stench emanates from Letitia's skin for a reason. Perhaps if she can cope with it, the unpleasant odor will disappear. And now the grown-up Letitia stood opposite her strange visitor, and he did not feel the stench emanating from her at all. The hermit doubted whether the stranger really had no sense of smell, and whether he perceived her as a completely ordinary person. But the girl had a flash of hope that the stranger could become her friend. Letitia asked the guest how it happened that he couldn't smell. He explained that it was because of an injury. As a child, he fell from a horse. The girl thought that this seemed to be true. She did not perceive her own stench, but because of it, she did not perceive any other odors. The hermit silently saddened that she would never have the opportunity to feel the aroma of a burning fire or the freshness of nature after the rain, which rare people around her spoke about from time to time. The visitor said that he was sorry that he could not enjoy the aroma of her delicious dish. The hostess was not ready for such a compliment and confusedly replied that it was just ordinary cabbage soup. The girl tried to cope with the hope of friendship with a strange visitor. She explained to herself that the fact that he had no sense of smell did not change anything. He just needed somewhere to stay for a short time. Suddenly, the pale man sitting at her table winced. The hostess was at first amazed, then decided that he was still pretending that he couldn't smell. The guest complained that he was too careless before the discovery of the hut, which is why he was injured, and now it seems the wound has opened. Letitia asked if the stranger was injured. He confirmed, and said that when the rain stopped, he would return to his place and treat the wound. The beggar woman did not believe it. She knew very well that she usually expresses a look that darkens the faces of people in her presence, and she believed that she could not confuse this disgust and contempt with something else. But now there was no point in thinking about it, and the only thing the hermit said to her visitor, turning away from him and lowering her head, was that he should leave as soon as the rain stopped. The visitor was tormented by something completely different. Resting his head on his palm, he objected to himself that for now it was impossible to do what he had in mind, that the girl was not ready yet. A strange pale man with cat eyes wanted to hug Letitia, sink his teeth into her neck and taste her blood. Towards nightfall, there was a dinner party at the estate of Baron Grandis, not very luxurious, but exquisitely served, and with the best dishes that the cook could manage. The crown prince himself was present at the dinner, a tall and pale young brunette in an embroidered camisole with a precious brooch in the form of a cross on a wide, turned-down lapel. The eyes of the important guest were a rare amber, even closer to gold, color, and with unusually narrow pupils, hair falling slightly over the eyes disheveled. He ate little and without appetite. The owner of the estate was worried that perhaps his dear guest did not like something. Crown Prince Bertram replied that on the contrary, the food was impeccable. Baron Grandis was embarrassed and said that His Highness was flattering him. The Crown Prince said that after trying only one dish, he realized how good the cook was on the estate, and that this was a discovery and the merit of the owner. The Baron was flattered and offered to drink to the guest. After drinking some good red wine, the important guest turned to the owner of the estate, saying that he was wandering through the forest and accidentally came across a hut, and asking if his nobility knew who lived there. The Crown Prince said that he was wandering through the forest yesterday. The Baron hesitated and replied that he did not know that there was any hut in the forest. Prince Bertram confirmed, described the hut as very old, and asked in surprise whether the forest really did not belong to Grandis's possessions. The Baron, nervous, said that he did, but that he could not know everything about him, since his territory was very large. Sipping his wine, the Crown Prince agreed that the forest was large, and told the assenting Baron that he had started hunting on the northern edge of the forest. But when he emerged, he found himself at the southern part of the estate. Turning a glass with a gilded rim in his hand, the prince with golden eyes said thoughtfully that, obviously, someone lives in the hut. The owner of the estate was silent. He really didn't like that His Highness was so interested in the forest and the hut, but he didn't dare interrupt the Crown Prince, and besides, he didn't want to reveal that he knew more than he was letting on. The Baron's blonde daughter brought a lace scarf to her pretty mouth, was silent for a while, and then decisively and quite loudly declared that she had tried to remain silent, but could no longer hide the truth. The father got scared and tried to interrupt the young lady, who knows what she might have let out. But the Crown Prince stopped him, specifying the name of the young Baroness, and also saying that he was very interested in what Alicia would tell, and telling her to continue. Squinting her eyes cunningly and angrily, the young lady said that in a forest hut there lived a witch, a very scary woman who cursed people to death. The young lady emotionally told the saddened Prince Bertram that the witch emanated a terrible stench that could be smelled from the other side of the hill. Not paying attention to her father trying to stop her, the young lady continued that even the power of the royal family, anointed for power by God, could not cope with such a smell. Gesturing emotionally, Baroness Alicia said that if something happened to the crown prince on the territory of the Grandis, they would be very guilty for not helping His Highness. The young lady begged the prince to stay away from the forest hut, to which he replied that he understood perfectly well that the lady was worried about the imperial family. The Baroness began to happily assent. Prince Bertram expressed regret that the forest animals can now only be observed from afar, and asked whether it would be better to avoid the forest in principle. Making eyes at the crown prince in different ways, Baroness Alicia confusedly agreed with his words and added that this would have happened anyway because of the stench. The dear guest internally disagreed with the fact that Letitia emanated a stench. Prince Bertram would not have turned his tongue, so to speak. For him, it was a light floral aroma, more beautiful than any roses. The golden-eyed heir to the throne recalled that when he felt that wonderful smell that accidentally touched his nose, his legs seemed to carry him to the source. Not a single plant smelled so tempting to the prince. The smell seemed to awaken all his sleeping instincts and resurrect the wildness that had weakened in Bertram, turning him into an animal during the rut. The cabbage soup that Letitia treated the imperial son to was remembered by him as disgusting. He would not dare to call cooking a dish from a single vegetable. Bertram recalled that the girl had a candlestick, but candles are expensive things. Only the baron and some rich merchants could afford them on the estate. The crown prince wondered where the candlestick could have come from in such a dilapidated house, and decided that Letitia was undoubtedly somehow connected with the baron. Looking at the baron's daughter, Alicia, who was very similar to Letitia, only taller, more well-groomed, and a little plumper, the emperor's heir realized that these two girls must be relatives, probably sisters. But Alicia, with her arrogant look and annoying attempts to please, irritated Bertram. Closing his eyes for a moment, the crown prince imagined her disgraced sister, ill-mannered, living in poverty and dirt, but sincere and, most importantly, with an exciting aroma. Bertram would prefer that Letitia be with him now, instead of the whole company of her relatives. After dinner, Baroness Alicia escorted Crown Prince Bertram to his room. She was determined to win the heir to the empire. The presence of the escort was also burdensome. The tricks of Alicia and her father were too obvious for the prince, who grew up in an atmosphere of palace intrigue and was specially trained in the techniques of managing people and looked low-grade to him. It was immediately clear to Bertram that the baron did not simply let the tired servant go to rest, but in advance wanted the young baroness to escort the important guest to his room. The prince thought that only his servant would buy such a trick, and then for money, but he did not mind tasting Alicia's blood, and decided that it was better to let her lead him through than to have to climb into her bedroom in his underwear, especially since you might not be able to resist and bite the lady to death. Meanwhile, the young lady pretended to twist her ankle. Gasping, she fell straight on Bertram. Grabbing the crown prince's hands, the young lady in a half-whisper asked him to forgive her for having stumbled. He pretended to be afraid for the young lady and asked if she was okay. Pressed close to the future emperor with her ample breasts and deep neckline, the blonde beauty said that she was fine, thanks to His Highness. The prince thought that Alicia, who grew up in the love of her stupid parents, was too spoiled and too accustomed to delight. In the capital, such an appearance as hers was not uncommon, but on the provincial estate, the young lady took from her all the advantages that she could. The heir to the throne also sadly thought that the baron's youngest daughter looked well-groomed and elegant, and knew how to behave nicely in public, thanks to the adults who were always with her, unlike the eldest daughter. Looking at the young lady, the crown prince decided that since she looked so much like Letitia, he would be lenient. But Bertram also had no intention of encouraging her impudence. Alicia, in a sweet voice, suggested to the future emperor that she would take him to her own room. The crown prince could not bear this and pushed the young lady away, saying that he would prefer him to die. The amazed and offended lady began to ask His Highness what he meant, but stopped short in fear. Full of hatred and contempt, the eyes of the heir to the empire sparkled with golden fire and looked like the eyes of an angry beast. Frightened, but still hoping to seduce the heir to the throne, Alicia tried to say something in order to appease the prince and impose herself on him as a further escort. Bertram harshly stated that he had already memorized the structure of the estate and knew how to get to his room. Alicia could not contain her indignation. She tried to object, but the prince, turning his back and leaving, told her good night in a harsh voice. The young lady tried to call the prince, but he angrily walked to his room with a firm and fast gait. The crown prince initially did not like the idea of visiting the grandest mansion. He did not want to communicate with its owners. The pale, yellow-eyed man with cat-like pupils needed only that unearthly aroma from the forest hut that made his heart beat faster, the source of which he wanted to simultaneously eat and possess. Entering his room, Bertram did not expect to see red-haired Simon there, his personal chamberlain and traveling companion. Simon was just lighting the fireplace and also did not expect the prince to appear so soon. He began to make excuses to Bertram that he wanted to light the fireplace before his arrival and go back to his room. Taking off his doublet himself, the crown prince said that he did not think that his closest servant dreamed of becoming a tramp soon. Simon began to assure His Highness that when he became emperor, his dream of becoming the best chamberlain of the imperial family, capable of supporting His Highness with all his heart, would come true. The prince looked angrily at his servant and asked how much money came. Simon answered that 500 gold pieces. Taking his doublet from the indignant prince, the chamberlain, embarrassed, explained that they had told him that they would give him the same amount if everything worked out. But this did not happen, so only 500. Bertram called Simon an old man in a guy's body and gave orders to find out about the witch living in a hut in the Baron's forest. The servant was amazed whether the crown prince was there today. He replied that yes, and that the girl's name was Letitia. The red-haired chamberlain fearfully clarified that no matter how false the rumors were, they did not need to get close to her. The servant was worried that this witch might really curse, to which the heir to the throne harshly ordered him to find out the girl's full name, where she was from, who her parents were, what she did, and since when she had been living in the forest. The crown prince also ordered Simon to find out why this girl is called a witch, what her favorite food is, what color she is, what size clothes she wears, and everything else he can find. The chamberlain sadly thought that the crown prince never pitied him, but said out loud that he would find out everything, and that with such influence, the forest witch could turn out to be a great magician. Having sat down in a chair, the heir to the empire ordered candles and a horse to be prepared for him the next morning. The servant was surprised why the crown prince suddenly needed candles. The prince grabbed his head and then rudely asked Simon if he would shut up if Bertram sold him and found another servant. The red-haired chamberlain bowed and said that everything would be ready tomorrow morning and went to prepare His Highness a bath. The crown prince thought that it had been 100 years since the witch hunt was abolished, but nothing had changed. It was obvious to the prince how Letitia had been treated all her life, since even the capital's Simon reacted this way to the witch, and the village people from whom Bertram heard stories about her were no better. Bertram thought that Letitia was probably rejected by everyone. She was treated like a witch cursed by a demon, and her parents probably abandoned her, so the girl lived alone in a hut isolated from the rest of the world. It was not surprising to the crown prince that Letitia behaved like an abandoned and frightened kitten. So the heir to the empire reflected on the unhappy past of the mistress of the forest shack, and also considered his plans for this girl. At this time, Letitia recalled her meeting with a strange guest. She wondered what was on this man's mind, why he left the money, although the girl said that this was not necessary. Letitia asked herself if God had deliberately sent someone who had no sense of smell to laugh when she waited for him to return. Yesterday, she was upset when a sudden visitor said that since the rain had calmed down a little, it was time for him to go. The girl wished the guest a good trip, and he said goodbye that they would see each other again. Near the threshold, the traveler turned to the owner of the hut, smiled at her, and even made eyes at her. Letitia convinced herself that the unexpected guest had said that they would see each other out of politeness, just like her grandfather. Having undressed, the girl resolutely went to a small lake, which was right next to her house, and dipped her toes in the water. The water was cold, which was not surprising in such weather, but Letitia, trembling, entered it. The girl thought that if she washed herself more often, she might not smell so bad. She also thought about the money that the visitor had left. With it, the beggar woman could have bought, if not a candle, but at least oil for a lamp. And for the first time in a month, she should have had enough to buy meat. But the girl was afraid to go to the market. Looking at her reflection in the water, she remembered her smart younger sister and her malicious words that Letitia would not be able to go there because of the stench emanating from her. The girl also remembered the man who took refuge in her shack from the rain. Unlike others, he did not mock Letitia and was not afraid of her, but on the contrary, he thanked her and even gave her money. While the disgraced Baroness was bathing, and then when she was trying to sleep, she kept thinking about Bertram. The morning was cold and cloudy. It seemed that it would rain again. Letitia was awakened by the ominous cawing of crows. Throwing on a dirty canvas cloak, the girl left the hut and stopped in thought. She was afraid to go to people. After standing for a while and finally deciding, the owner of a whole gold coin walked along a forest road between tall trees. There were quite a lot of people at the market. They all pinched their noses, squinted, and wondered what kind of stench this was, if someone was going through something. Letitia heard passers-by discussing how some of them had felt such a stench for the first time in their 40 years of life, while others had never encountered such a thing even at 50 years old. It was unpleasant for the girl to hear the complaints of others that their noses were about to fall off. But she moved on. Finally, Letitia saw a butcher shop. The girl was scared, but she determined herself that she could do it, that she just had to ask for meat and give her a coin. The beggar woman reasoned that the money Bertram gave should be enough, and there might even be change left over. The girl remembered how the old deposed baron told her that it was proper to leave change for the merchant. Thinking that she needed to quickly finish her trip to the market and return home, the girl approached the shop and asked for 1 pound of pork. The merchant's question about which part of the pig she wanted threw Letitia into confusion. She really didn't know which one, and stuttering, she quietly said that any. The seller clarified exactly how the girl was going to use the purchase, whether she would bake a pie, cook soup, or simply fry meat, and said that pork steaks were popular now. Then the merchant began to smell Letitia. The man winced and coughed. Letitia wondered if she should run away. Perhaps if she ran to another butcher now, she could quickly take the meat, pay, and leave. A regular customer approached the store asking if there was turkey. The merchant greeted him joyfully and said that a large piece had just arrived today. But first it was necessary to serve the client who had come earlier, and the butcher turned to Letitia with the same question: which portion of the pig should he sell her? The girl was so embarrassed that she simply answered the first thing that came to mind, namely, that she needed the meat for soup. The seller began to take out a suitable piece. Here the second customer began to smell Letitia's skin. The woman coughed and indignantly asked the merchant if he was selling spoiled meat. The seller stubbornly denied, but the client insisted that she smelled rot right here. Turned around, she angrily said that she would go somewhere else, and left, despite the seller's attempts to stop her. The meat seller was saddened by the bad luck. Then he wondered where this stench was coming from, and realized that it was from the first customer. Hanging over Letitia in a rage and pointing his finger at her, the merchant shouted that she stank. The seller was indignant at why someone like her was wandering around the market. She probably didn't have any money. She wanted to take the meat and run away. The trader shouted at the girl to get away from his shop right now. Standing among the scattering people, Letitia sadly thought that this was a bad plan. She never had time to buy anything before those around her began to smell her. The merchant shouted even louder for the beggar to get out and pushed her. Letitia fell to the ground, injuring her hand. The hood of her cloak flew off her head. The girl wondered why she was doing all this. The meat seller, rolling his eyes, was indignant that some beggar had come to him. But then he looked at Letitia and was horrified. Bony, with dull hair and a bad smell, the girl exactly fit the description of a damned witch. The people around began to whisper. Some were horrified, some doubted. The merchant reminded them of the signs of the famous witch. Everyone ran away screaming that the witch had come to curse them. The butcher stumbled, fell, and began to beg for mercy. He begged that the one he considered a witch would forgive him and not curse him. For Letitia, there was nothing new in everything that surrounded her now. People fled, someone asked for mercy, children cried, and no one thought to give the girl a helping hand. Deciding that since she was being mistaken for a witch, then she needed to act out this role, Letitia stood up and, hovering over the merchant, demanded that he give up the meat that she was going to buy. Quickly wrapping the meat, the seller said that the girl should take at least everything, just not curse him. Holding out the package, the butcher began to say that there was no need for money, but Letitia shouted that she was not a thief. The seller named the price. Letitia threw him a coin and angrily told him to keep the change. The butcher, on his knees in tears, asked for forgiveness for being rude to Letitia. The girl turned around and said that since the merchant considered himself guilty, he could simply die, and left. In the evening, the beggar woman reached her shack and saw a familiar yellow-eyed man in a raincoat near her. He noticed that the girl was crying and, looking at her sympathetically, tried to hug her. Letitia broke free and ran into the house, throwing the package of meat on the table and trying to catch her breath. She wondered why this man was here. Bertram, who entered the hut after the girl, asked what she was thinking about. Letitia, stuttering, asked the prince who he was, why he was pursuing her, and what the hell he wanted from her. The man walked up to the girl and took her by the shoulders. His cat-like eyes lit up predatorily. Bertram said that he was worried that such a beauty lived alone. Frightened and indignant, Letitia said that she already knew that she was ugly, and even more, there was nothing about her that could attract a man. Then a thought occurred to the girl, which she immediately voiced, asking if Bertram was a pervert. He was surprised why such thoughts. The owner of the hut reminded her of her smell. The yellow-eyed guest did not understand what the problem was. The girl remembered that he had said about his lack of sense of smell and became embarrassed. The heir to the throne told Letitia that he wanted to give her something and opened a travel bag that contained many candles. Putting the candle on the candlestick and lighting it, Bertram explained that last time he was worried that it was dark in the hut, and that he was worried that the girl had not bought the oil, so he brought candles. Letitia was grateful, but also in amazement as to why there were so many candles. The crown prince did not tell her that last night his closest servant took all the candles from Baron Grandis's estate. Bertram thought that today the owners of the mansion would have to dine in the dark, but that this did not concern him. Turning to Letitia, he said that when she let him in a couple of days ago, it was as if he had met a savior. Bertram said that he got lost when it started pouring rain, because it was his first time in this forest, and he also missed his companions then. The prince said that he was just wandering through the forest, and it seemed to him that he would die from the cold. The guest thanked the owner of the hut for letting him in, lighting the stove and feeding him warm soup, which made him want to repay her in some way. Bertram also said that he constantly thought about the soup that Letitia fed him, to which the girl replied that such a number of candles was still too much to pay. While making eyes at the owner of the hut, the visitor suggested that maybe then she would give him the strawberries that were on the table. The girl asked again in shock. The prince confirmed that it was strawberries, added that they looked very appetizing, and asked where Letitia bought them. The exiled daughter of the baron replied that she picked them herself. Bertram was surprised and said that the strawberries were probably very tasty, since a nice girl picked them. Letitia was indignant at the nonsense her guest was constantly talking about. The prince, in turn, stated that he had learned several facts about the poor girl standing in front of him. Bertram began to list the facts of the surprised and frightened Letitia. The first was that if you call her sweet or beautiful, she gets angry. The girl, stuttering, quietly said that her visitors should forget about it. As the second fact, the prince named that if Letitia receives something, she tries to repay it, or, if she wants something, she is ready to sacrifice something. Bertram admired this and thanked the owner of the hut. Saying all this, the guest with golden eyes smiled widely. The beggar woman looked away in embarrassment, and the crown prince voiced this as the third fact. Standing opposite the girl, Bertram enjoyed her scent, which filled the entire hut. For him, it was a bright, but at the same time seductive aroma. Closing his cat's eyes, the prince was wondering which part of Letitia's body to bite first. The girl interrupted his thoughts by asking why he closed his eyes. Bertram replied that he was just a little tired. The crown prince noticed a slightly bleeding wound on the hand of the owner of the hut and asked if she had been injured in the fall. Carefully and tenderly taking the girl by the hand, Bertram expressed the opinion that the wound was serious and that Letitia must be in pain. The girl thought that she had never been touched like that before. Examining Letitia's hand, the prince assumed that she had not applied the ointment and then suddenly licked the wound. He explained to the astonished girl that he had treated the wound with saliva. Bertram proved to Letitia that wounds are usually treated with saliva. The girl claimed that this was a lie. In fact, the crown prince remembered the words of his closest servant and used them to justify his action. Simon was surprised that the heir to the empire called a doctor, even when he simply pricked himself on a flower, and that isn't it easier to lick the wound. And now it was the crown prince's turn to be surprised that a girl who lives alone in the forest does not know about this. The prince once again licked the wound on his dirty hand, and for Letitia it was like an electric shock, while the golden-eyed guest himself was surprised whether this was really the baron's daughter. Bertram recalled the chamberlain's report that, born with the curse of a terrible smell, Letitia lived on the estate when she lived as a child. The girl had not yet reached adulthood when she was sent to the forest. Moreover, she was a little over 10 years old when she began to live in the hut. Because of the nickname Witch, she never had friends. But Simon found it strange that from Letitia, even the family refused. Thinking about the servant's story, the crown prince bit the skin on the girl's hand and licked the drop of blood that came out. As he thought, the blood turned out to be sweet. Bertram was driven crazy by the fact that Letitia's blood was as tasty and fragrant to him as her smell, but the girl was very scared. Hugging the owner of the hut by the shoulders, the yellow-eyed prince said that when he looks at her, it's as if he becomes someone else. Handling Letitia's hair, the man with golden eyes leaned towards the girl and whispered that she should come with him, and then he would pull her out of this ditch. Letitia recalled her first day in the hut. She was placed here at the age of 11. On the first night, the girl could not sleep. There was a storm. Because of the darkness of the forest, nothing was visible. Huddled under a canvas cloak, Letitia cried from the cold, loneliness, and fear. The thunder sounded like punishment for her. Then the girl realized that only she herself could cope with everything that was happening to her at that time and before. Now, poor, dirty, rejected by her family and everyone around her, the cursed witch stood in her hut in the arms of a man. She was surprised and pleased that someone cared when she was hurt, sympathized with her suffering, did not shout that she was dirty, and talked to her while holding her hand. Because of all this, Letitia believed that her guest really did not smell. Hugging his counterpart, the yellow-eyed brunette tenderly said her name. The girl felt that she was melting. Her head was spinning. Then, like a sudden flash, the thought came that because this man had no sense of smell, she knew perfectly well that she couldn't please anyone. And this strange guy came out of nowhere, and it was unlikely that he would somehow change her life. Letitia forcefully pushed Bertram away. He asked what was the matter. He looked shocked, offended, and indignant at the same time. The owner of the hut said, turning to the guest, that he could not save her. The man with cat eyes asked in surprise what she was talking about. Letitia hysterically declared that she did not live in a disgusting ditch. Looking in front of her with a half-empty gaze, with a strong touch of rage, the girl with matted hair firmly and separately, but with anguish, said that she was the source of this abomination. The prince pursed his lips and said nothing, his shining golden eyes expressing horror and displeasure. Letitia no longer looked into emptiness, but at the man standing in front of her, as if he were to blame for her troubles by appearing so suddenly and continuing his visits. After Bertram left, the guest with golden eyes was reminded of the bag full of candles he left behind, a small basket of strawberries that he encroached on, and a candlestick with a candle that he himself lit. but which had already gone out. A faint ray of moonlight penetrating through the window barely illuminated the table on which all this stood, and behind which the disheveled and scratched by branches mistress of the hut sat dejectedly in her old, dirty dress. The girl dreamily and sadly thought about her recent visitor and his strange reaction to her hysteria. Then the man just fell silent, and after a couple of minutes he calmly said that Letitia was probably tired today and she needed to rest. The guest also added that he would return tomorrow. After this phrase, he left. The failed young lady, rejected by everyone, wondered why Bertram was trying to see her. Once, when she was a child, her grandfather felt sorry for the girl. So is this strange man in a cloak really only feeling sorry for her? The girl recalled how a slightly disheveled brunette with beautiful but frightening eyes invited her to go with him and promised to pull her out of this damn ditch. The owner of the hut sat in such thoughts until the morning. The beggar woman could not seriously believe that the strange guest could really be carried away by her, but she really wanted it. The girl didn't know how to react to the visits of the man in the raincoat, whether to send him away, to thank him. What if he was planning something bad? Or maybe he was really carried away by her, or just felt sorry for her. Letitia thought about her grandfather, whom she had not seen since she was 11, and was very wanted to ask him what she should do. When the sun was already high above the horizon, the heir to the empire approached the forest hut on a quietly and slowly walking black horse. The prince was wearing a gray-brown cloak with the same lining, made of expensive material, but an inexperienced passerby could have mistaken it for a commoner's cloak. Trying not to make a sound, the crown prince dismounted and walked to the window. The owner of the shack sat with her back to him and did not seem to hear anything. Entering the hut, Bertram cheerfully greeted the girl. His cloak opened, revealing a white silk shirt with a bow pinned with a ruby brooch. Dirty didn't know what to say to her, and didn't even say hello. The visitor came to the table and sat down opposite the girl. He tried to smile sweetly, waiting for what she would say. Having gathered her courage, Letitia said that there were too many of them. She did not specify what exactly, and Bertram asked again. The girl said with a sigh that her favor was not worth the candles that he brought. The man was perplexed, but in a polite tone confirmed that, of course, this was too much. Letitia, in turn, surprised by the guest's calm reaction, said that she would accept this gratitude, but would thank him in return. Bertram asked in amazement. Letitia was afraid that he might demand something, but she was determined and confirmed out loud that she also wanted to repay her visitor, so let him say what he wanted. The man froze in shock, but then he liked the idea. Sitting in front of a girl determined to accept any outcome, he calmly and cheerfully agreed. She tensely waited for what exactly he would demand. A crowd of indignant peasants and merchants gathered in front of the mansion of Baron Grandis, led by the butcher from whom Letitia recently bought pork. The gatekeeper let everyone in, and now they stood in the elegant garden in front of the disgruntled landowner. A helpful footman also stood nearby, ready at any moment to carry out the feudal lord's orders. The Baron tried to calm the crowd, from which inarticulate cries were heard about some kind of horror and his own cruelty, and hoped to quickly send everyone home. Those who came answered that they could not be calm, because they were now living in fear because of the cursed witch, and that she was already in the village, at the market. Baron Grandis asked in horror if this was true. The commoners replied that it was, and that because of her everyone, traders and buyers, had fled to their homes. The butcher added in tears that the witch bought the goods from him, and now everyone considers his store cursed. The landowner nervously and confusedly said that this was a shame. The blond man was amazed and outraged by the behavior of his eldest daughter. According to his plan, Letitia was supposed to live quietly in the forest. Why did she have to complicate everything so much? Was it really revenge for not sending her the necessary things? The landowner was frightened that his people were so alarmed because of the foul-smelling dirt, and outraged that they crowded in front of his house with demands, ignoring his status. Clutching his head, the lord tried to understand what to do. A voice from the crowd interrupted the landowner's thoughts with a question whether he was silent, because the rumors were true. The feudal lord in amazement asked the bearded peasant who shouted out the question what he meant. He replied that, as the gatekeeper named Thomas said, a bony and disheveled witch came to the mansion and claimed to be the daughter of its owner. From the crowd came questions about whether this was true, whether that was why the Baron was postponing the expulsion of the witch, and statements that this rumor had been circulating around the area for a long time. The Baron was horrified. He understood that if it was confirmed that Letitia was his daughter, people could leave his lands, and there would be no one to collect taxes from. The official daughter, Alicia, approached and addressed the crowd in a harsh tone, but with respectful words. She apologized to the astonished and frightened commoners for the Lord's family's failure to ensure their safety. According to the young lady, the Grandis thought that they had done everything to prevent the witch from coming to the village, but they did not expect this, and they are sorry that they could not prevent such an unexpected act. Those who came still tried to be indignant, but Alicia, covering her face with her hand, said plaintively that after the forest witch visited the estate, its owners were ashamed to remember such a trifle. Bowing her head and lowering her eyes, the young lady said that perhaps the witch's mind had become clouded. The butcher again emerged from the horrified crowd and asked whether the appearance of the forest witch was not very dangerous. Alicia confirmed and told the astonished crowd that a decision would most likely be made soon. The commoners clarified whether this meant the death of the witch. To the horror and anger of her father and the bewilderment of the footman, the young baroness said that, according to rumors, there are powerful magicians in the capital who are not affected by the power of the cursed witch, and that the Grandis are thinking of hiring them to expel her. The beauty said that this would cost her family a lot, but that for the sake of peace in their lands, the Grandis would sacrifice what was necessary. The crowd cheered and thanked the young lady and her family. Alicia asked if everyone would now go home. Those who came confirmed and said that now they had nothing to worry about, since the young lady cared so much about them. The commoners left. Alicia looked after them with a sweet smile. The Baron, in shock and horror, did not know what to think. He told his daughter that what she had promised the crowd was impossible, and he reproached Alicia for what she had said. The young lady's face contorted with rage. She hissed that it was high time to get rid of Letitia. The Baron, stuttering, asked his daughter if she was really going to get rid of her sister. Alicia screamed angrily. And what else remains? She has been talking about this for 20 years. Baron Grandis said uncertainly that Letitia was still Alicia's older sister, but the blonde young lady was indignant that who would wish for such a sister, but certainly not her. The young baroness added that she did not even think that she had a sister. The Baron asked if her daughter really wanted to hire a magician. Lord Grandis sadly said that he did not have that kind of money. The arrogant young lady waved her father away and said that she said this so that people would leave. The landowner felt sorry for expelling his eldest daughter and completely depriving her of support. He thought that an excuse could be found for people, for example, that the witch was too powerful. The Baron suggested that his youngest daughter tell people that the forest witch could curse anyone, so no matter how much money they offered, there would be no suitable magician who would be willing to come. Alicia chuckled and said that anyway, someday she would have to drive Letitia away. Lord Grandis was in ambivalent feelings. He was simultaneously afraid for himself, his position and family, and felt sorry for his eldest daughter. When peasants and merchants surrounded and questioned their landowner, he was afraid that they would reveal him and leave his land, and maybe kill him and his family. But now the feudal lord was breaking into a sweat from the thought that his youngest daughter could kill the eldest. The Baron clenched and unclenched his fists and could not calm down. Alicia, his flesh and blood, was always beautiful, like a doll. Her father and mother could not take their proud glances off her and tried to dress her in all the best. But, to the horror of her parents, the girl was an unusual child, gradually revealing her cruel side more and more. When Alicia thought that no one was watching, she tortured and killed animals. And then she could say that, on the contrary, she was trying to treat a poor chick or cat. Although in front of her parents, the psychopath could at first even boast of her villainy. But then she began to lie to them too. The Baron was worried that although Alicia was his daughter, and although she pretended to be a kind and beautiful lady in front of people, she would suddenly change and show her worst qualities. Suddenly, the landowner's thoughts were interrupted by a servant who approached with the words that the personal chamberlain of Crown Prince Bertram was looking for his nobility. The Baron was puzzled. He did not know what to think. His youngest daughter standing next to him was interested. Having heard the news told by Simon over a cup of tea, Baron Grandis was shocked and asked if it was true. The personal servant and companion of the heir to the imperial throne confirmed that he seemed to be considering the interlocutor's daughter as a bride. The Baron asked whether His Highness himself said this, or this was the Chamberlain's assumption. Simon replied that the Crown Prince said it personally. Alicia silently triumphed. Her father expressed joy. Internally, he was really happy, but he also doubted what he heard because it was so unexpected. But nevertheless, he could not help but imagine himself as the proud son-in-law of the future emperor, in magnificent robes and with much greater opportunities than now. Looking at his daughter, turning pink and feigning embarrassment, the Baron at the same time could not believe that she could become an empress, and imagined how imperial outfits and luxurious jewelry would suit her. Meanwhile, the prince's chamberlain asked the landowner if his daughter needed time to pack her things. The red-haired man with a smile explained to the surprised Baron that His Highness wanted to personally bring the bride to the imperial palace and asked how long it would take. Confused and joyful, Lord Grandis exclaimed that His Highness could not be kept waiting and that the young lady would quickly prepare. Simon thanked him. Grandis confirmed that they would do so. There was an awkward pause. After a couple of minutes, the camper chuckled thoughtfully. He clearly wanted to say something. The Baron asked if the prince's servant wanted to convey something else. He recalled the promise of monetary support due to the fact that the part of the treasury allocated for the prince's trip was almost exhausted. Simon's reminder sounded vague, and Lord Grandis did not immediately understand what it was about, but his daughter quickly took out a wallet that she had prepared in advance, which contained more than the requested amount. She turned to the Baron with the words that he himself said to take care of the gold for His Highness in advance. The Chamberlain was pleased that there was more money than promised, said that this was not necessary, and promised to put it to good use. After that, Simon, with a wide smile, asked the lord and young lady to be ready the day after tomorrow. They happily promised. The landowner clarified whether the prince had said what he wanted for dinner, or whether he had expressed any other wishes. The Chamberlain looked away in confusion, but he had to admit that His Highness had other plans for this evening, which unpleasantly surprised the Baron and his daughter. The Crown Prince's closest servant chuckled as he replied that these were His Highness's personal matters. That evening, the intrepid traveler could see from afar how the horse, rented by the heir to the imperial throne for incognito walks, was peacefully grazing near a forest hut, rumored to belong to an evil and dangerous witch. Inside the shack, on a wooden table, there were some overcooked mushrooms in a simple plate. Crown Prince Bertram himself, wearing a silk shirt with a precious stone on the bow, and, as usual, a little disheveled, laughingly pointed to the plate and asked the hostess what it was. A stuttering, unkempt-looking blonde in an old, stained dress and dull, unkempt hair told her visa-mate, whose status she had no idea about, that he himself had asked that she pay him back with dinner. Bertram ironically clarified that this turned out to be a snack. The girl exclaimed displeasedly that yes, it was a snack. The prince laughed quietly and without malice, and said that apparently, after this there would be a main course, probably steak. The blonde did not understand the names of the dishes, and where could she get something other than mushrooms collected in the forest during the day? The man said with a smile that he really wanted dinner in exchange for candles, but it seemed that he expected too much. Looking at Letitia with yellow cat eyes, in which something predatory, something affectionate, and something mocking was read at the same time, the prince said that perhaps we need to come up with something else. Trying to understand what the interlocutor meant, the 2-year-old was very nervous and chewed her thumbnail. At the same time, she awkwardly bit off a hangnail, and a large drop of blood appeared on her finger. The prince's golden amber eyes lit up even more predatorily. Approaching the exiled baroness from behind, he said that she was bleeding. The failed lady living in poverty was perplexed because she did not notice how the visitor was behind her chair. He crept up so quickly, as if he had simply moved from one place to another. Bertram asked the beggar woman if he could treat her. The girl was surprised, especially when the visitor clarified that he was going to treat her with saliva. Moreover, she was simply horrified and also in terrible embarrassment. But the prince, despite this, took Letitia's hand in his and simply licked her finger. The girl was in a little pain, and the whole situation seemed absurd to her, but at the same time she had a strange, previously unknown feeling. When the tongue of the golden-eyed brunette touched her skin, a shiver ran through her whole body. But she was not disgusted. On the contrary, she wanted it not to stop. Bertram also didn't want to tear himself away from the girl's finger. He liked the taste of her blood, and at the same time it was erotic for him. Having enjoyed the taste, which seemed to the heir to the empire better than all the palace sweets, the prince looked at the mistress of the hut affectionately, and even with some kind of affection, but with regret that she lived in such conditions. Continuing to hold the girl's hand, the brunette in a silk shirt asked if he could change his request. Letitia was afraid that she might not be able to fulfill what the guest asked. He also said that the new request would be easier to fulfill. The disgraced young lady wanted to know what kind of request this was, but the prince, hugging her around the waist, suggested that they first go outside. The girl was outraged by such impudence and did not know how to react. But she liked this strange, persistent man, and she agreed to take a walk through the night forest. After some time, having reached a small clearing, the out-of-breath girl asked where they were going. Bertram asked in return whether he was walking quickly. The girl was indignant that she was not worried about the speed of walking, but about how long they still had to walk and what she could do for Bertram in such a place. The crown prince cheerfully replied that if he spoke right away, it would be boring. So while he remained silent, Letitia could only hope that it would be something fun and not terrible. Bertram told his disgruntled escort that there was only a short distance left to go and asked her not to worry. The girl didn't know what to think. She was tormented by the question of whether the visitor had really lied that fulfilling the new request would be easier. Having reached another clearing, overgrown with delicate flowers that bloom in the evening, the prince announced to the frightened Letitia that they had already arrived. The man explained that he found this place while hunting and wanted to show it to her. Letitia did not expect to see so many flowers. The most unusual, frightening, and at the same time pleasant thing was that the girl smelled some kind of aroma for the first time. Before, the stench from her own skin drowned out all other odors, despite the fact that Letitia herself was not felt either. Here, a strong aroma of flowers filled her chest, which the girl called the cursed witch could not help but say. She knelt down and began to touch the flowers with her hands, enjoying the smell and fearing that it would disappear. The prince was amused by the expression, the aroma of flowers. For him, the most seductive aroma was the smell of Letitia's body, because of which he could not smell any other smells now, and which he liked madly. I wanted to simultaneously possess the girl sorting through flowers, despite her unkempt appearance, and eat her. Bertram remembered how he licked her blood, and understood that no matter how much of this blood he drank, it would never be enough for him. The crown prince wanted Letitia more and more, longed to take possession of her completely, although he knew that one day she would die because of his thirst. Rising from her knees, the beggar woman admitted to Bertram that many things were happening to her for the first time, and this confused her. The girl added that all this, although surprising, was pleasant. After a short silence, Letitia embarrassedly and somehow angrily told the annoyed prince that now it again seemed to her that she was not repaying him for a favor, but was receiving it herself. The girl muttered that she would cook what Bertram wanted, a steak, or as it is correctly called, and in a quiet but not resistant voice she demanded to go back. Turning around, she decisively and somehow desperately walked in the direction of her pitiful, crumbling shack. The prince was perplexed. At the estate of Baron Grandis, standing next to the crown prince sitting in a chair in the large room allocated to him, the executive, but loving to express his opinion, Chamberlain was indignant. He didn't understand whether His Highness was really considering a dirty and smelly ragamuffin with a reputation as a dangerous witch as a bride. Simon expectedly believed that in order to counter the restrictions placed on the prince by his powerful father, the heir to the throne should have chosen someone from an influential family in the capital, and not from the family of a provincial baron. The chamberlain asked if it was not too late to change his mind and return to the palace as soon as possible. Noticing Bertram's absent-minded gaze, Simon asked if His Highness was listening. The heir to the throne was absorbed in completely different thoughts. The monologue of the closest servant, although annoying, was more like white noise. The prince did not take his eyes off the bouquet of yellow flowers in a twisted white vase standing in front of him. He wanted to trample these pathetic flowers, but much more I wanted to crush Letitia like a flower, take her all and mercilessly tear her apart, bite her from head to toe and make her mine. The prince mentally, honestly admitted to himself that an animal desire was growing in him, crushing and rubbing several flowers in his hand. The man with cat eyes decided that it was time to go after the prey. Throwing the crumpled petals onto the floor, the heir to the imperial throne ordered the closest servant to go and convey to Baron Grandis his words regarding which of his daughters the heir was going to marry. In the shady forest, Letitia again missed her prey. She tried to learn how to hunt in order to get meat for a steak for Bertram, but the trap that had once been given to her from the estate and had not previously been used by her did not work. A well-fed white rabbit galloped dangerously close to the trap, remaining unharmed. Letitia was indignant that the Baron's damn people gave her old stuff that couldn't catch anything. If they decided not to provide food, they would have given her something better for hunting. Wanting to check whether the trap was broken, the girl poked her wand directly into its middle. It snapped shut. Letitia, in fear, recoiled. Having concluded that, after all, the trap was intact, the stinky woman began to shake the stick clamped in the trap to free it, and some kind of note fell out of the trap. Letitia grabbed it first, looked at the strange icons for a while, and then decided that what difference did it make since she couldn't read. The lack of such a skill rarely bothered the girl in the forest, but now it simply made her furious, and the thought of Bertram flashed through her head, who could laugh at Letitia after learning that she was ignorant. The girl waved her hand, deciding not to give a damn about the stupid steak. Quickly walking home, she scolded herself for doing some kind of nonsense, and for the fact that she had promised to repay the guest for the candles. Letitia reproached herself for becoming strange after meeting Bertram, for example, remembering that he liked steaks, and deciding to catch game with a trap that she had never used before. The girl also recalled how this strange, handsome man treated, and in fact, licked her wound, and what a pleasant trembling she felt then. Cursing, Letitia ran towards the house, convincing herself that the only reason to think about Bertram was that she still had not repaid him, and that thinking about anything romantic was stupid. At the same time, the father who had rejected his daughter and the arrogant younger sister stood near the entrance to their mansion. Filled suitcases and chests lay next to them, and the Crown Prince's chamberlain stood opposite. He was dejected that he had to convey the unpleasant news to the Baron and the young lady, and now listened to their angry reproaches. Lord Grandis expressed to Simon that he did not understand. He said that the Baron's daughter would become the prince's bride, but this was not Alicia. What an absurdity! At the same time, the landowner fearfully thought that if the Crown Prince's servant was not joking, would this mean that his eldest daughter had been declassified, and now the whole family was disgraced, especially since the prince himself did not appear, although he had promised. The Baron, of course, thought that Bertram would pick up Alicia in his own carriage, so he did not prepare his own. Clearing his throat, Chamberlain Simon explained that he had not misspoke when he said that the Crown Prince wanted to take the Baron's daughter to the imperial palace. He was only saying that this daughter was not Lady Alicia. Lord Grandis shouted, "How could it not be Alicia? Did Simon want to say that he has a daughter that he doesn't know about?" Internally, the Baron was panicking. Did the prince and his servant really know about Letitia's existence? But from where? As if reading the landowner's thoughts, the Crown Prince's servant said that there were no secrets from the imperial family. Standing in an elegant dress, with a wide bow in her carefully groomed blonde hair, and with a face twisted with anger, Alicia shouted that this was impossible. The Chamberlain firmly said that it was possible. He clearly repeated that His Highness needed His Honor's eldest daughter, Lady Letitia. The confused landowner could not believe this. Stammering, he asked if she would really be made the bride of the Crown Prince. The Chamberlain confirmed, and said that he would accompany the lady. Alicia furiously shouted that this was unthinkable. The red-haired Simon, himself confused, but obliged to strictly follow the orders of his high-ranking owner, repeated that everything said was true. An angry young lady in a pink and white dress embroidered with delicate flowers, bulging her already huge blue eyes, screamed that how could this be when the Crown Prince could see this stinking slob? The Chamberlain, who himself began to be indignant at Alicia's attacks, but did not dare answer her in the same tone, reported that, according to the Crown Prince, he found her in a hut in the forest when he was hunting. The young lady, disfigured by an angry expression, clenching her fists with rage and impotence, wondered, even if everything was as Simon said, how it was possible that the Crown Prince himself wanted to marry a stinking, dirty ragamuffin. Baron Grandis indignantly interrogated the prince's closest servant how he could do this, because the lord introduced him to his beautiful daughter and even gave him money. The Chamberlain agreed. Puzzled, he himself was embarrassed. The landowner recalled that he had paid Simon himself as gratitude for the successful cooperation. The Chamberlain asked if it was not a success that the Baron's daughter would go to the imperial palace as the bride of the heir to the throne. The landowner shouted that he was talking about Alicia. The red-haired Chamberlain asked if this meant that Letitia was not the daughter of Baron Grandis. Simon sadly thought that even though she really was an abandoned daughter, the landowner was right in everything. He had nothing to object to. But out loud, the Chamberlain diplomatically said that since his nobleness had 2 daughters, apparently there was a misunderstanding, and it was good that they, at least late, understood each other. The Baron was terribly angry and worried. Alicia stood there completely filled with rage and barely holding back tears of resentment. The Chamberlain was satisfied with the confusion of the lords, and slyly narrowing his eyes, politely said that since Lady Letitia could not leave today, he would give 1 more day. Tomorrow at the same time, in the same place, he will meet the Baron's daughter, who was supposed to be here today. The landowner and his recognized daughter looked for a long time after Simon was leaving. They were confused and sad, not to mention angry. Inside the mansion, Alicia was destroying everything she could get her hands on. Her father tried to calm her down, but to no avail. The young lady repeated how it was that the prince's bride was not her. How could it be possible for this stinking Letitia to become a princess? The Baron agreed with his daughter, but said that since it was not he who decided this, nothing could be done. The young lady did not agree. Alicia asked if her father wanted to say that he didn't care if Letitia went to the palace, because she was his daughter too, as that servant said, because one way or another his daughter would become a princess. The landowner tried to deny it, but his daughter screamed for him to wake up and that Letitia was a witch. Alicia asked her father if he really didn't understand that this would lead to the collapse of the whole family. The Baron asked in horror what his daughter meant. Alicia said that she did not know what that witch Letitia did to the prince, but that it was unlikely to last long. The lady expressed her belief that once the witchcraft was over, her sister would be overthrown, and what would then become of the family that gave birth to the witch who became a princess and tainted the bloodline of the imperial family. The father objected that they had been told that they had to send Letitia, and all that remained was to follow the orders. Crossing her arms, Alicia grumbled that she was admitting that an important member of the imperial family had made an unwise decision. She added displeasedly that she, her father and mother, would inevitably become accomplices when the witch became a princess, and would ultimately turn out to be traitors. The Baron asked what they should do then. Alicia asked him to wake up and stated that she had come up with everything herself. She said that it was necessary to gather all the villagers, and that it was time to do what the father should have decided on long ago, to start a witch hunt. With her eyes flashing ominously, Alicia thought that Letitia was not destined to take what she did not get. In the evening, a crowd of commoners with torches and pitchforks ran up to Letitia's crumbling house. The mistress of the house was just cooking soup with old leftover meat. The girl was surprisingly calm. The arrival of people who wanted her dead was expected. The only thing was that dying in a fire must be very hot and probably painful. One day, a disgraced young lady was sent a book with pictures from the mansion, and in it the witch was burned alive, an unpleasant sight. Letitia dreamed of dying a painless death, but there was nothing to be done about it, and still this life was much more painful. The girl had the thought that in the end she wouldn't be able to eat, even though she couldn't catch anything, but she took out the rest of the meat and cooked it, but it turned out to be in vain. Also, the persistent golden-eyed brunette could not leave her mind. Letitia mentally asked why she was thinking about him at the moment of her probable death. The beggar woman came out to the people with torches and leaned against the door of her hut. Still with the same thought about Bertram, the common people came closer. The butcher from whom Letitia had made her purchase now stood behind him, although he carried one of the torches, and asked his comrades if everything would really be all right. A young colleague at the market, from a peasant family, but fashionably, albeit inexpensively, dressed with a pitchfork in one hand and a torch in the other, asked what the butcher was worried about. He replied that they were going to the witch. Both merchants remembered how Baron Grandis said that magicians would save everyone, and agreed with each other that it was not clear why they should go to a dangerous witch, even if the magicians would not come. But were there really other ways? The voices of other comrades were heard in the crowd. Some were worried that the magicians were not so reliable, and even the priest did not know what to do, and what they, ordinary people, could do. Others said that there was nothing to worry about, because this witch was just a girl. The butcher quietly, stuttering, asked if his comrades really thought that there was nothing wrong with going to see a witch. The young colleague confirmed that everything would be fine and ordered everyone to hurry up. Although he was standing behind, his voice was loud and impressive. Approaching the hut, the commoners stopped hesitantly. The cursed witch herself walked towards them. A red-haired peasant with powerful muscles standing in front shouted that they had all come to punish her. But Letitia said that they could punish her later. But now, let them leave. The peasant loudly said that this was impossible. The so-called witch asked why. The peasant began to answer that it was because the inhabitants of the village had long wanted this in order to sleep peacefully. Letitia interrupted the speaker by saying that if no one had done anything for 21 years, then couldn't they wait another day or two? The peasant clenched his teeth furiously, and another voice came from the crowd, declaring that they could not bear it any longer. The disgraced lady was indignant about what exactly they could not tolerate, what exactly they had been putting up with all this time, and what exactly she had done to them. Letitia asked if these people had ever seen her devour children, if at least one child had disappeared in this area, and if anyone had died from her spells. The girl screamed. Had she ever caused fatal diseases? And what the hell had she done to all these people? The red-haired, powerful peasant standing in front of everyone angrily replied that the witch was alive and stinking next to them. That's what was her fault. Letitia half sarcastically said that she also thought so. How dare a stinking witch live and the like, but not today. Turning towards the hut and only slightly turning her head towards those who came, the girl told them to come next time. She would die in a couple of days. The red-haired man asked with anger and mockery what the witch was going to do. Would she again drag her stinking carcass into the village? Or would she go to the Baron's mansion, still believing that he was her father? Letitia, who had already reached out her hand to the doorknob, turned around and asked, dumbfounded, what was happening? The peasant mocked that the Lord would not give the witch a penny, and that he had firmly made his decision. Letitia asked what the red-haired man was talking about. He grinned that the Baron had finally given permission to deal with her. The girl could not believe that her own father ordered her to be killed. Her eyes swam. Letitia wondered what Baron Grandis's face looked like when he ordered the death of his own daughter. Subsequently, no matter how much the girl thought about it, she could not imagine her father in such a situation. She decided that it was probably because she had not seen him for a long time, and at that moment, Letitia only smiled sadly. The peasants and merchants shouted that it was time. They needed to fight back the witch, kill her. A beggar woman in a dirty dress stood, not trying to run away. One of the peasants brought a torch close to her. The girl got burned and screamed. The peasant said that she was a real witch since she was afraid of fire. Amid cries that the witch should be burned at the stake, two strong men approached Letitia and grabbed her hands. The girl screamed to be let go. Then the attention of the avengers from the people was attracted by something strange behind them. They turned around and saw a black animal with golden eyes, similar to a cat, but incredibly huge and muscular, standing with its front paws on a just-killed peasant. People were whispering in fear about where this huge, rabid beast had come from. It had just not been here. One man said that as a child he was scared by a bear in the forest, but this monster has a completely different size. People were scared by the fact that this giant seemed to live in the forest all the time. Meanwhile, Letitia tried to break free, but she couldn't. The peasant, with a grimace of disgust, tightly grabbed her wrist. It was the same red-haired one who stood in front of everyone. He growled that this was the work of a witch, that how dare she use such dirty tricks, and squeezed the girl's throat with a huge, tenacious palm. Letitia thought sadly whether she would really die like that. In the crowd of angry, superstitious men, she imagined the pale but handsome face of Bertram. The girl thought that it was unknown whether he would come at all. Suddenly, the peasant strangling the girl was attacked from behind by a huge black beast with golden eyes, long and sharp fangs, and claws like sabers. The beast knocked the strangler to the ground and sat down in front of Letitia, looking into her eyes. His sparkling golden gaze for a moment reminded the girl of her already familiar visitor. The men came closer, waving torches right in front of the face of a huge animal. The giant muscular cat looked at them for a while, and then suddenly jumped on one. The peasant who was strangling Letitia came to his senses, stood up and said that he thought that she had summoned the beast with her witch magic. But the girl herself was wondering what kind of creature this was. In the 10 years that she lived in the forest, she had never seen anything like it. The so-called witch decided to benefit from the appearance of a strange animal. She did not consider herself obligated to tell her offenders the truth. The peasant demanded that the forest witch drive away the beast. Letitia stated that she did not want to, and that she was not in a position to fulfill the requests of strangers who also attacked her. The common people, some in fear, some in rage, were saying that the girl was an evil witch, and that although it was unknown when she managed to summon the creature, if you killed the spellcaster, then his beast would immediately disappear. The strangler, taking out a dagger, decided to pierce the witch's heart. Only he raised his weapon over her like a furious beast, to the horror of everyone present, including Letitia herself, grabbed the attacker by the side with his huge mouth and bit off half of him. What was left of the man collapsed to the ground. A giant animal with a bloody mouth rushed at the panicking people, driving them away. But one of the men, before fleeing, managed to throw a torch on the threshold of a wooden hut. The shack quickly became completely engulfed in fire. It was blazing with a roar, and Letitia, who was standing nearby, was engulfed in heat. The girl was in shock. At first, she wanted to put out the fire, but she realized that even if she put it out, then what would happen next? She would continue to live in this shack, only in a charred one. There will be more holes in it from the fire. Most of what is inside will burn, and being in the charred hut and near it will be dangerous all the time. Now some beam can easily fall on your head, just as the floor can collapse. And a man died next to Letitia's burning house, and all those who ran away will blame the cursed witch for this. They will tell everyone that the witch who lives in a hut in the forest summoned a black beast and killed people. Letitia mentally asked herself if they would leave her alone, and understood that it was unlikely. The foul-smelling girl always thought that she was the dregs of society. But this time, Letitia was absolutely sure that her more or less measured life had come to an end. Turning around, the renegade saw that a giant animal, smeared with human blood, was sitting and looking at her. Letitia wondered why the creature did not attack. The look of the beast seemed familiar to the girl for some reason, as if she had seen it somewhere. Then sparks from the burning building flew towards Letitia, and she realized that it was dangerous to stay here any longer. The girl was distracted by the shack for just a second, but when she turned back to the animal, it was no longer there. Letitia wondered where the beast had gone and thought that for the first time, with the exception of her grandfather, someone was on her side. But now, she was alone again. The beggar woman waited until her hut burned down, turning into a pile of charred rubble. It was already dawn. There was nowhere to go. Letitia sat on the ground near what was left of her house when the sun had already risen quite high above the horizon. Suddenly, Bertram appeared from somewhere. He began to anxiously ask the girl what happened, whether there was a fire, whether she was hurt, whether she was able to get out safely. The beggar woman muttered that she was not hurt. The prince said that at least this was good, but that, apparently, her whole house had burned to the ground. Letitia confirmed that there was nothing left, and she thought about the soup that she had cooked before the men arrived. Her stomach was cramping from hunger. Bertram suggested that the girl was upset that this had happened to her house. She replied that it was not very good. The man asked if there was somewhere for her to stay. There was no doubt that the girl had nowhere to go, and the brunette invited her to go with him. Letitia was indignant. The crown prince reminded her that he had already invited her to go with him. The girl shouted, "Why on earth would that be?" Bertram once again reminded her that she had nowhere to go, since her shack was completely burned down. Letitia decided that she had to go to the estate and ran there. She wanted to look into the eyes of her father, about whom people from the village said that he personally gave the order to kill his own daughter. Letitia hoped that this was all a lie. The crown prince tried to stop the girl. She told him not to follow her. Bertram was indignant at why she was so stubborn. She had nowhere to go. Wouldn't it be better to go with him? Letitia replied that she would go home to her parents. This saddened the prince, but at the same time seemed convenient to him. Not wanting to give himself away, Bertram asked in a surprised voice whether the interlocutor really had parents, and added that he would make sure that she got to them if she didn't mind. Letitia simply continued walking further. She found the golden-eyed man's behavior strange. The girl thought that he probably had a lot of questions. Why didn't he ask why she didn't live with her parents, or why she lived in such a dilapidated hut? Letitia recalled the pleasant moments spent with Bertram, was angry with herself, and resolutely walked on to the baron's mansion. The girl demanded that she wake up and not be mistaken about the brunette. As Letitia approached the gates of the mansion, the guard held his nose, unable to bear her scent. Calling the girl a witch, the gatekeeper put his spear forward, and Letitia demanded to call the baron. Bertram watched the whole scene from behind a wide tree trunk. The guard was afraid that the witch would bring damage to the estate. He stuttered and said that it was impossible to invite the owner. Letitia was indignant. Had Thomas not heard the news yet, and asked several times if he was scared. Baron Grandis, who heard the noise, approached the gate. The feudal lord told the guard that the witch would not harm him, so he would talk to her himself, and he should not tell Lady Alicia about this. Letitia shouted at the gatekeeper to disappear if he didn't want to die. Thomas ran to the mansion, promising the baron that he would call people. Lord Grandis looked with displeasure at his eldest daughter, who was unnecessary to him. She sadly said that her house had burned down, and she would no longer be able to return there. Having gathered her courage, the girl decided to ask whether her father really wanted to kill her. She didn't really understand whether she really wanted to know the truth, but from the baron's reaction, she realized that he really gave such an order. At first, the feudal lord could not really say anything. He only looked at his daughter with shame, sadness, and at the same time with disgust. Then he began to make excuses confusedly and unconvincingly. Letitia thought that the fact that her father dreamed of getting rid of her had always been known to her, although she tried to ignore this cruel truth until she heard from the villagers about the order to kill her. The girl saw that just a minute ago the baron was afraid that everyone might find out about their family connection, but even watching how he desperately justified himself, she did not want to admit it. But the fact remained that her father abandoned Letitia and wanted her dead. The girl herself wanted to die, which she admitted, bursting into tears. The Baron fell first into amazement, then into rage, and shouted that why, instead of dying, she survived and came here. Lord Grandis shouted if Letitia knew how much he suffered because of her, people could find out that she was his daughter, and then there would be no trade with his lands. Couldn't Letitia just live quietly in her hut and not appear on the estate? Then its owner wouldn't have to make such a decision. The Baron turned away, clutching his head, and then turned his head to his daughter and ordered her to now live as quietly as if she were dead, and did not even think about coming again. And he would tell everyone that she was dead. The girl went into the forest. Reaching a clearing, she stopped to rest and tried to sort out her emotions. Letitia asked herself if it was sadness, and answered herself that no, the sadness passed quite quickly, and now she felt as if her heart had been pierced, and at the same time she really wanted to rest. Crown Prince Bertram paid a visit to the Baron, trying to look cheerful. He asked if he had not said that he wanted to make his daughter his wife. The landowner confirmed. Then the Crown Prince changed his tone and angrily said that Grandis knew about this, but dared to try to burn her alive. The Baron tried to justify himself by saying that he thought that His Highness wanted to marry another daughter. Bertram indignantly asked if the Lord had not already discussed this with his servant. The Baron could not help but confirm this, but he had a strange feeling that the Crown Prince did not look as usual. Grandis tried to justify himself by saying that his daughter was simply born with a small problem, and he was only trying to fix everything. The prince asked the Baron if he had gone crazy. The landowner stammered what His Highness meant. The Crown Prince said menacingly that if the Baron had not gone crazy, then how dare he deceive him? Lord Grandis was shocked. Before this, the Crown Prince had spoken to him kindly, even though he was just a provincial baron. And now it seems that the rumors about the arrogance and rudeness of the heir to the throne began to be confirmed. Alicia entered, wearing an elegant mourning outfit with appropriate jewelry. The young lady tried to portray sadness. Sitting on the sofa opposite her father and at the side of the Crown Prince, the lady asked His Highness for permission to finish for her father. Without waiting for permission, Alicia herself began to say that, as she said last time, this witch, her older sister, was cursed. Bursting into tears, the young lady explained that her family tried to free Letitia from the curse, but in the end, nothing worked, and they were left without their property. Alicia said that they initially had no choice but to send the stinker away from the estate, that they were sure that Letitia understood them and would have done the same in their place. Wiping away her tears, the manipulator said that she thought that His Highness had already realized that it was better to marry a beautiful and kind woman than this rotten witch, and that all this time he had been deluded. The prince said that Alicia was a very talented liar. She was indignant, and the heir to the throne continued that for a second it seemed to him that it was not a person sitting in front of him, but a snake. The prince asked whether the Grandis estate was too luxurious for him to lie about his poverty, especially since Alicia herself was sitting dressed in an expensive dress and jewelry. Bertram said that besides, he asked why the Baron wanted to burn his bride alive, and whether he was a witch. Alicia screamed that her sister was definitely a witch. The young lady claimed that since she and her father knew that Letitia was a witch, being faithful servants of His Highness, they could not allow their marriage. The heir to the throne angrily and harshly said that his counterparts not only dared to deceive the Crown Prince, but also questioned his greatness. The Crown Prince asked if they thought they were worthy to stand on the soil of the empire after this. The Baron began to beg His Highness to forgive Alicia for her offense, and he replied that from that moment on, he would deprive their entire family of the title and the privileges associated with it. The already former Baron Grandis begged the Crown Prince for mercy, falling to his knees, and his daughter grabbing the heir to the throne by the hands. Alicia said that His Highness misunderstood them and that she would explain everything, but he was indignant at how dare she touch him with her dirty hands. Suddenly, taking a short sword from the servant's sheath, the Crown Prince cut off the young lady's hands. She fell to the floor. Her father immediately rushed to her. The mother also ran to the noise, and seeing her daughter without hands, fell into hysterics. Bertram, in a cold, calm tone, ordered the chamberlain to burn the estate of the former Baron Grandis for insulting the future bride of the crown prince. Moving to the window, the heir to the throne was sad about the fate of Letitia. The landowner, who had suddenly aged 10 years in appearance, hoped that all this was just a nightmare. He and his wife were kneeling next to their bleeding daughter when they were surrounded by flames. The entire mansion was on fire, and there was no way out. Letitia was about to drown herself. She found a fairly deep lake, which was located in a picturesque place in the forest, and decided that it would be nice to die here. The girl thought that she had lived in this forest for more than 10 years. It would become her grave. Thinking that she would leave this hell today, Letitia sank. Before the beggar woman had time to drown, she was pulled out of the water by unknown means when Bertram found himself nearby. Letitia was annoyed that she could not even die humanly. She indignantly asked her savior what he was doing here. Bending over the girl, the man with tears in his eyes asked if she really wanted to die and leave him alone. Letitia tried to break free, called herself a witch, and explained that she stinks terribly, which is why everyone hates her. The girl said that this is why now only a few charred boards remained from her house. They wanted to burn her alive. Hysterical, Letitia demanded that Bertram leave her alone and not approach her. The man, on the contrary, hugged her and said that she was not a witch, but a completely ordinary girl, and that he thought she was very sweet. Letitia was indignant that Bertram was lying, but he, looking at her tenderly, said with a smile that it was not he who was lying, but the inhabitants of the village. The man then asked how Letitia's smell had anything to do with the fact that she was a witch. Did she really eat children, as people say, or bring on the plague, since she didn't do any of those things? Bertram said that Letitia simply does not suit this place, so she should go with him. With these words, the man kissed the hands of the girl he had saved. Letitia, blushing, agreed in fear. She, anyway, had nowhere to go. The savior thanked her for her consent. 2 carriages were waiting on the road in the forest. They were too simple for the heir to the empire and were designed to keep him incognito, but a commoner could never afford such in his life. Moreover, even in the baron's estate, there was only one similar one. The sight of the carriages confirmed the girl's thoughts about her savior. She had long guessed from his silk shirts and jewelry that he was an aristocrat, but since Bertram often wore the same clothes and behaved simply, Letitia took him for an impoverished aristocrat, and here were 2 luxurious carriages. And the prince thought with satisfaction that although the carriages could not be compared with the imperial ones, they looked quite noble. Bertram did not want Letitia to guess that he was a member of the high nobility before arriving at the palace. He thought that it must have been difficult for the chamberlain to urgently find such a carriage in the provinces that would look both too ordinary for the crown prince and of sufficient status to be allowed into the palace grounds. On his own initiative, Simon, disguised as a peasant, greeted Letitia and said that he had heard a lot about her. The girl noticed that the red-haired young man had difficulty breathing through his nose in her presence and instinctively hid behind Bertram. Simon, laughing politely, said that Letitia was shy, as he had heard. Respectfully turning to Bertram, the red-haired young man said that he would ride in the back carriage. The prince, perplexing the servant by addressing him, said that, as he wished, the chamberlain wished the gentleman a pleasant journey and climbed into his carriage. Sitting in the front carriage, Bertram looked with a gentle smile at the frowning Letitia sitting opposite. He warned that because they were in the forest, the road was slightly uneven, but as soon as they left here, the carriage would stop shaking, which would be in about 3 hours. Letitia was amazed that the forest was so large. She had never tried to go around it completely. A temple appeared among the trees. The crown prince offered to go there if Letitia had any wishes. He said that if you pray well, your wish can come true. Letitia was surprised that her interlocutor believed in God, the prince thought puzzled. In fact, he himself was evil spirits, and at the same time he was accustomed to observing the external rituals of faith and, if necessary, turning to magic without thinking about what or who he believed in and whether he believed. After some time, Bertram found an answer suitable to the situation, simply asking semi-ironically, "Who does not believe in God in this empire?" Letitia replied that she knew that many people here were religious, but she thought that she had already encountered the religious superstitions of the people. The prince, in turn, thought that his interlocutor did not know anything, and she did not need to know. Deciding that there was enough reasoning, Bertram grabbed Letitia and sat him on his lap. Now he was even more pleased, despite her indignation. Hugging the girl, Bertram told her that she was very beautiful. She asked why he constantly calls her either sweet or beautiful. The man replied that it was because it was so. Letitia asked if he was up to something. Maybe he decided to sell her to some witch who wants to sacrifice her to become more powerful. Maybe the witch told him that if he brought another living witch, she would fulfill his every wish, and he could take over the empire. The prince laughed and said that it sounded interesting, but he did not want it. Gently touching the girl's face, Bertram began to describe to her his desires of a completely different kind. More than half a century ago, there was a struggle on the continent. Brave knights in armor mercilessly killed each other, not forgetting to rob the population. The war lasted too long. People were losing hope. Suddenly, like a comet in the night sky, Phaelus the First appeared. He called himself a messenger of God. Through unknown forces, he ended the war and united the continent. And this is how the Phaelus Empire appeared. The first emperor ruled, as he himself said, with the help of God's power, and no one could resist him. Even now, 60 years later, Phaelus' power is still unshakable. When the great-grandson of the first emperor heard from a girl who did not know who he was that he wanted to take over the empire, Bertram felt funny, because he was already the main heir. The prince was not particularly eager to take on the entire burden of governing the state, but still dreamed of overthrowing his father, because he himself suffered from his tyranny, and Bertram already had a specific plan on how to do this. Whispering in Letitia's ear how he longed to take possession of her, the crown prince, in addition to erotic aspirations, concealed a dark plan that the girl should not have known about. Bertram could indeed gain power over the empire faster with the help of Letitia, and this really meant her death. The carriages arrived at the prince's residence late at night. The windows of the luxurious palace complex shone with thousands of candles, and fireworks were fired here and there. Less than an hour later, the heir was already sitting at a table set according to all the rules of court etiquette, and waiting. A little further away stood the chamberlain, always ready for his orders. Letitia burst into the dining room, accompanied by a maid in a court dress. Her hair, which had finally received proper care, was shining. Her skin was glowing with purity. The strong smell, to the joy of the prince and the hidden displeasure of all his subordinates, did not go away. The girl demanded from her friend an explanation of what was happening, where they were, and what Bertram was trying to achieve. The crown prince smiled slyly and contentedly, admiring both Letizia in a beautiful dress and how well his plan was being carried out. When they arrived at the main entrance to the palace, and as soon as Letitia got out of the carriage, the prince immediately picked up the dirty little girl in his arms and carried her, producing an effect both on the girl herself, although she was indignant, and on the courtiers who carefully suppressed laughter. Then Letitia was taken away by a strange girl named Cecilia, whom Bertram introduced to her as her new personal maid. The beggar woman was waiting for an incredibly huge, superbly furnished room, as well as a bath with various soaps, oils, and creams. Letitia was not prepared for the fact that the maid had to wait on her while she was washing, and prevented the girl from performing her duties, either screaming or whining that she was crazy. Now Letitia told Bertram that Cecilia had been spying on her bathing. The prince laughed, and turning to the blonde, told her that the maid was serving and not spying. He explained that servants always accompany aristocrats, and asked not to be angry with Cecilia. Letitia didn't understand whether aristocrats really liked such strange things. Bertram invited her to sit down first and added that he wanted to hear her voice closer. When the girl sat down on a carved chair upholstered in red velvet, the crown prince repeated to her what he had already told her when they first arrived, namely, that this was the imperial palace, and he was the first heir to the throne, Prince Bertram Fong de Felice. Letitia impolitely replied that if she had known this in advance, she would not have gone anywhere with him, because, according to rumors, he was a cold intriguer, an arrogant and cruel killer. Looking soulfully at the girl, Bertram asked if she really considered him like that. Letitia replied that he was not like that at all. He was kind. Confused, the girl said that it was true that you shouldn't believe all sorts of rumors. The prince thanked her for such words. He expressed the hope that Letitia would continue to live in comfort in the palace. The girl asked where there was always warm water there and whether this was available anywhere else. Bertram replied with a smile that this was only available in the Crown Prince's palace and that all these amenities were provided through magic. The guest was surprised, and the prince added that magic is very convenient. It can make water warm without wasting energy on heating, and even make the wind blow, of course. Magic is not God's gift, but it can even heal people. Bertram expressed confidence that although magic was not yet widespread, he expected that when people learned about its benefits, they would like it. Letitia was impressed. She said that she didn't know much, but that magic was an amazing thing, and she thought that Bertram's expectations would come true. The prince replied that his interlocutor's words gave him strength, and then, gently taking her curl, he said that today she was especially beautiful. Letitia was afraid of Bertram's compliments. She believed that she knew better than anyone that it was a lie. But at the same time, the more the man spoke, the more it seemed to her that she was becoming a beautiful lady, like Alicia. The guest of the imperial heir wondered why her heart was beating so fast, or rather she guessed, but was afraid to admit it to herself. Before going to bed, Letitia, in a silk nightgown with frills and bows, stood at the huge window, either admiring the beauty of the palace as far as they could be seen at night, or plunging into her thoughts and memories. The maid turned to her with a bow, saying that everything was ready and the lady could go to bed. Letitia looked at Cecilia incredulously and asked if she smelled. The maid answered in a polite voice that since the lady was asking, then of course she did. The heir's angry guest attacked Cecilia and asked why she was pretending that Letitia didn't stink. The maid, showing miracles of restraint, said that she wasn't pretending. Letitia said that Cecilia was lying because she had never insulted her or called her a witch. The shocked maid expressed condolences that her mistress had felt this way. Cecilia politely said that, of course, the lady smelled, and not particularly pleasant, but she was already aware of everything, thanks to His Highness, and only wanted to do her job, looking after his guest. Letitia was indignant that she was not a child, that she needed to be looked after. The maid apologized for the ambiguous wording and asked not to misunderstand her. Cecilia explained that her family had looked after the crown princes for generations. It had been her duty since birth, and asked if the lady had any further questions. Letitia frowned and rudely drove away the offended maid, saying that she wanted to be alone. Simon stood at the door to the prince's guest's room, behind a column. He secretly admired Cecilia and watched with interest where she was going. A little later, the closest servant of the heir to the throne was already in his luxurious office, where the crown prince was sitting at an oak table littered with papers, decorated with gold ornaments. A fireplace was blazing behind the heir, and in the office, besides Simon, there was another servant. Calling his chamberlain, Bertram asked him how Letitia was. Simon replied that he waited until she fell asleep. The crown prince approved, and turning to the second servant, said that he was ready to listen to the report. The dark blonde youth began to report that as soon as His Highness left the territory of Baron Grandis, His Majesty the Emperor urgently arranged a meeting, and that he was now in a small northern town. The servant said that the Emperor had not given the exact date, but a couple of days ago, a letter had arrived saying that preparations were underway for his return to the palace, and that, according to the plan, the heir should come to his father in a week. Bertram laughed slightly at the fact that the Emperor was so far to the north. The dark blonde servant said that, according to His Majesty, the purpose of the trip was to develop the northern territories and popularize tourism. But the heir to the throne understood that his father had other plans. The crown prince wondered if his father himself had sent him to the baron, and now he was telling him to leave, even in this body so far to the north. Bertram regretted that he did not know what the Emperor was up to, but he guessed that he wanted to fool everyone around his finger. The chamberlain reminded that despite the fact that His Majesty gave his son powers, he still must participate in meetings and make decisions. Simon protested to the irritated prince. Doesn't this mean that the emperor enjoys his power without being held accountable for his actions? The prince ordered the chamberlain to be silent. He apologized, and the second servant reported that this time His Majesty had left with the Holy Father. Bertram did not expect such a turn of events. He was surprised what happened to the Holy Father, who never left the temple, justifying himself by saying that he wanted to be closer to God. The prince was tormented by the thought of what the emperor and the Holy Father could have agreed on while he was not in the palace. In the morning, Cecilia knocked on Letitia's door. There was no answer. Then the maid herself came in, apologizing and saying that if the lady did not want to be late for the meal, she needed to quickly dress and comb her hair. But Letitia was not in her bedroom, not in the bed, not in the bath, not on the balcony. The maid wondered if this girl had run away. Then she needed to warn the guards. But if His Highness found out that Cecilia had not kept track of his guest, she would not be happy. Passing by the closet, the maid heard a rustling sound, and it was in the closet that Letitia found herself. At night, after Cecilia said that she would endure the smell of her guest and take care of her, Letitia fell into hysterics. She was sure that sooner or later the maid would cover her with insults. Clutching her head, the girl remembered how much had happened in the last 24 hours. The burned-down house, the attempt to drown herself in the rescue, the arrival at the palace. It was all too much. Deciding to rest, Letitia went to the bed, but it seemed too big to her, like everything else in the room. Out of habit, the girl could not relax. Letitia's gaze fell on the closet. Taking a small pillow, the girl climbed into it, and although she could only fit while sitting, she decided that this place suited her, and soon fell asleep. In the morning, Letitia was awakened by an angry maid, saying that it was already morning, and asking why the lady was sleeping in such a place. The maid reported to the sleepy Letitia that His Highness was already waiting for her, and said that she would help the lady wash and get ready, because she should be beautiful. The crown prince's guest was indignant that the maid was going to spy on her again, and sent her away. At breakfast, Cecilia, in a yellow morning dress with a floral pattern and a frilly cape, showed all her many years of undernourishment and a complete lack of table manners. The servants were embarrassed that the new mistress was eating so sloppily and overeating so much, although they tried not to show it. However, they understood that no one had ever taught Letitia. The crown prince, stifling a laugh, complimented Letitia on how beautiful she was and smiled sweetly. The closest servant was in shock. He could not get used to the fact that His Highness was showing himself to be such a kind person. Bertram noticed that his guest had food on her face, and reaching out with his hand, removed the crumb from Letitia's cheek and, without thinking twice, ate it himself. The girl turned in surprise at the crown prince, and he took advantage of this to send his guest his hottest look, at the same time erotically running his finger over his lips. Letitia first melted, then became embarrassed, then became indignant and declared that if Bertram was hungry, then let him eat his food. He sweetly said that, of course, he would do so, and his guest would also eat her way before it got cold. Letitia's heart was beating again. She didn't like it. She had only calmed down yesterday, and now, again, the girl's heart was beating especially hard when she looked at Bertram. Having pulled herself together, Letitia clarified what it would be better for her to call her interlocutor, Your Highness the Crown Prince, heir, master, or something else. Bertram, blushing slightly, noted with a laugh that the first option was suitable. Then the girl clarified whether it was worth addressing him as you. The prince laughed again, asking if this really began to bother his guest. Looking from under her brows, but trying to restrain her intonation, Letitia replied that she now knows who he is, so she is trying to be polite. Unable to bear it, the girl flared up, saying that, of course, she was not like the rest of the nobles, but she had an idea about some things. The prince, half dejected, half irritated, said that he understood and asked Letitia not to be angry. He thought that probably she was taught by an old groom who was deprived of his baronial title and all privileges by his own son for drunkenness. Bertram knew that the old man was the only one who took care of the girl in the entire estate. The prince also knew that the groom was officially retired, but he also heard the version that the second granddaughter set him up and killed him. Sipping wine, the heir to the throne said that in truth, he would prefer that his guest do what she wanted. Letitia was surprised. The crown prince continued that if she was used to speaking informally, then that suited him. Then she almost fainted, although she managed to control herself, the guest's maid. And the imperial heir, looking into the eyes of the incredulous Letitia, said that he wanted her to see in him not a prince, but simply a man named Bertram. The prince told the amazed guest that sometimes it seems to him that everyone is looking at him, but no one sees him. Letitia asked Bertram why he now spoke like a tramp, and then, addressing the prince by his official title, added that she wanted to say something. Bertram interrupted the girl, saying that he wanted her to address him by his first name. The guest said okay, and calling the interlocutor by name as before, asked to entrust her with the work. The prince chuckled, but Letitia explained that she could not simply relax while she was being looked after. She was taught that the favor must be repaid. Bertram thought that the former baron had taught his granddaughter a bunch of useless things, but he asked out loud what the girl could do. After listening to the answers, the prince explained that they already have a person to chop wood, and no one repairs torn clothes in the palace. They simply throw them away here. But he promised that he would come up with something.